Uchenna could feel his world crumbling beneath him, as though the ground itself had betrayed him. His breath hitched, his chest tightened. How could this be true? Oluchi, the woman he had poured his entire life into, the woman for whom he had bled his heart dry, emptied his pockets, and mortgaged his family's home, was she now slipping through his fingers? Whispers carried by the wind confirmed his worst fears. A sharp pain knifed through his chest as his vision blurred. The weight of sacrifice and heartbreak was too much to bear. His legs buckled, and before he could grasp the fading edge of consciousness, darkness claimed him. In a serene village, deep inside the city of Owerri, Nigeria, Uchenna's hands were calloused and thick with the mark of hard labor, but they were gentle when it came to his family. His life, like the road that stretched out before him, was long, rough, and unforgiving. He was a vulcanizer, known for his skill in fixing tires, but more for his quiet resilience. The sun often blazed with fury on most days, but Uchenna kept his little shop open, day after day, mending punctures and pumping air into the tires of passers-by. He wasn't much, not in the way the world might judge success. Uchenna had no degree, no flashy car, no property, but what he had was an honest living. It was a simple existence, taking care of his aging mother and younger siblings with all he had. And though the road he traveled wasn't paved with riches, his heart was full of love and determination. He has had the responsibility of being the father of the house since he was 14. Their very wealthy father, Chief Okoro, passed away, leaving their mother, who was a third wife. Their father was capable of taking care of them, and he took care of them all with fairness. Immediately their father passed, their father's first and second wife, with their children who were more older at that time, took everything and shared it among themselves, leaving Uchenna, his mom, and siblings with only a house, which his father gave them to stay before he passed. They had no money at all, so Uchenna had to man up and take care of them. His business gradually started to thrive. They could take care of daily needs. With time he was able to establish himself as the #1 vulcanizer on his street. He was on the path to success, and no one would stop him. Or so he thought. It was on one of those blistering afternoons, when the sun hung low and the streets were busy with the hum of vendors and cars, that Uchenna first saw her. Oluchi. She was walking down the street in her nursing school uniform, her steps confident but graceful. Her curves were the kind that turned heads, but it wasn't her looks that caught Uchenna's attention. It was the kindness in her eyes, the warmth in her smile as she spoke to him. She wasn't like the other girls from the nursing school who often looked down on him, the vulcanizer on the street. "Excuse me, can you help me with the matron's tire?" Oluchi asked, her voice soft but firm. "Of course, madam," Uchenna replied, as he carefully set about fixing the flat tire, stealing glances at her every so often. He was struck by how different she seemed from the other students he saw parading around the area, always too busy, always too important to acknowledge him. She thanked him and handed him a little tip, then walked off with a wave. Uchenna couldn't help but feel something stir in him, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. It was a spark of hope. Maybe life had more to offer than the dusty street and the worn tires. That night, as the stars began to twinkle above the village, Uchenna was on his way home after a long day. He had just finished working on another tire when he heard a faint scream. It was coming from the direction of the church. Without hesitation, he sped toward the noise on his motorbike. When he arrived, he saw Oluchi surrounded by a group of petty thieves, their hands outstretched toward her bag. Her eyes were wide with fear, and for a moment, she froze. But Uchenna wasn't about to let her suffer. He revved his engine and zoomed toward the thieves, knocking one of them off balance with the force of his bike. The others scattered, and in the confusion, Oluchi found herself safe. "You're all right now," Uchenna said, as he helped her onto the bike. "I'll take you home." She was shaken, but grateful. As they rode through the dark streets, the hum of the engine and the cool evening breeze, Oluchi began to speak. "Thank you," Uchenna. I don't know what I would have done without you. Uchenna smiled, though he was still tense from the confrontation. You don't have to thank me. I'm just glad I was there. From that night on, something shifted between them. They began to talk more, and slowly, their friendship grew into something deeper. She would always go to his shop in her free time to have a conversation with. Uchenna had a good sense of humor and Oluchi loved him for it. He always made her laugh heart out. Her friends would mock her and ask her why she was hanging out with the vulcanizer man. She would ignore them. It's none of your business, she always answered. Despite the mockery from her friends, Oluchi agreed to be his girlfriend. She was very good to Uchenna, always making him meals, teaching him how to take care of himself and be healthy. Uchenna, in turn, dedicated his life to making her happy. His shop, once his sole focus, became secondary as he lavished her with whatever little he could afford. Uchenna's love for Oluchi was all-consuming. But the more he spent on her, the less he could contribute to his family. His siblings, his mother, all of them began to feel the weight of his diminishing contributions. He wasn't coming home early as usual because he spent most evenings with Oluchi. She thought to spend in himself. They went to fancy places for dinner, and sometimes they stayed in the love garden of her school chatting into the night. His family did not get as much attention as he used to give them. His mother and siblings complained, but Uchenna didn't care. Oluchi was worth it. The days turned into months, and Oluchi's nursing exams loomed on the horizon. Uchenna was there for her every step of the way. Though not formally educated, he was a wise man, always offering words of encouragement, buying her books, and giving her the little money he could spare. He believed in her dreams just as much as he believed in the power of his love for her. But as the exams approached, the financial burden became too much. Uchenna found himself scrambling to make ends meet. Oluchi's friends became more distant, their sneers sharp and cruel. They didn't understand why she was with him, the vulcanizer. They couldn't comprehend the depth of his love and the sacrifices he was willing to make. In the midst of this, one day, a tall, well-dressed figure arrived in the village, Ugochukwu, a Lagos big boy with a reputation for wealth and influence. He had returned to his hometown and was driving to his family house when he saw Oluchi walking toward him. From the moment he laid eyes on her, he knew he had to have her. Ugochukwu went on to find out more about Oluchi from his cousin, who was also a nursing student and lived in the same hostel as Oluchi. His cousin told Oluchi about Ugochukwu, and along with her friends, tried to convince Oluchi to give him a chance. But Oluchi vehemently refused. Ugochukwu was relentless. With lavish dinners, expensive gifts, and promises of a better life in the city, he wooed Oluchi. At first, she resisted. She loved Uchenna, and the idea of being with a man who walked on tires seemed absurd to her friends. But Ugochukwu's money, charm, and lifestyle were hard to ignore. Still, she resisted and even told Uchenna about his advances, to his dismay. Her friends, however, were less kind, mocking Uchenna at every turn. They were disgusted by the sight of Oluchi with the vulcanizer. They felt he was even ruining their chances of having a Lagos big boy spending on them and their friend Oluchi. Things began to change when Oluchi's exam fees became due, and despite Uchenna's best efforts, he couldn't raise the money. He worked tirelessly, even late into the night, and stopped dropping money at home just to save for the fees, but it wasn't enough. Oluchi grew agitated, and after being convinced by her friends, she told Ugochukwu about her predicament. He decided to step in, offering to pay the entire fee. Uchenna's pride burned when Oluchi told him about her conversation with Ugochukwu, but he knew she had no choice. He was falling short, having already stretched himself too thin. Nevertheless, Uchenna refused to give up. He wasn't going to let another man take his woman. Determined to prove himself capable, he borrowed from his savings. When it still wasn't enough, he used his shop as collateral to secure a bank loan. It was a huge risk, but he couldn't bear the thought of Oluchi failing because of money. When Oluchi passed the exam, Uchenna was overjoyed. He had made it possible for her to follow her dreams. But then, another exam loomed on the horizon, an even more expensive one that would determine if Oluchi could practice as a nurse in Lagos. Uchenna was devastated but didn't give up. Having exhausted all his savings and funds, he racked his brain for solutions. One day, as he was thinking aloud, his mother approached him. "Uchenna, I don't know what's happening, but you're not yourself these days. You look worried and tired," she said. "Mama, I'm fine," he replied. "My son, you don't look fine. I've been hearing rumors about you and a girl," she pressed gently. "Mama, please, I want to rest. Whatever you've heard, there's no issue, just my wife-to-be, Oluchi. Don't count your eggs before they hatch. Guide your affairs with wisdom," she advised. "I've heard you, Mama. I want to sleep," he said, turning his back, desperate to think in peace. After several days of agonizing contemplation, Uchenna decided to do something drastic. Oluchi was worth it, she was his wife-to-be. With a heavy heart, he took his father's house documents and used them as collateral for another loan. Oluchi passed the exam. She was now a nurse, ready to step into the world and carve out a future for herself. But there was one more hurdle: she received a prestigious job offer in Lagos at a top government hospital. She needed to move immediately and required money for travel expenses and accommodation. Uchenna had nothing left to give. Drained and desperate, Oluchi turned to Ugochukwu, who had been waiting patiently in the wings. He didn't hesitate to help, providing her with the money she needed and even arranging for her to stay with his cousin in Lagos. Oluchi kept it a secret from Uchenna, lying that she had borrowed the money from her sister. Her plan was simple: she would work hard, repay Ugochukwu, and eventually bring Uchenna to Lagos to help him set up a vulcanizer business. Everything would be fine, or so she thought. As Oluchi settled into her new life in Lagos, things began to change. The city's busy and glamorous lifestyle transformed her. Ugochukwu showed her the finer things in life: classy restaurants, fancy buildings, and beautiful places. He showered her with gifts and money, picking her up from work in his luxurious Benz. Oluchi felt like a queen in this dazzling new world. Gradually, she started giving Ugochukwu more attention. She began to forget Uchenna, the man who had sacrificed everything for her. She no longer answered his calls, offering excuses and half-hearted apologies. The calls and messages went unanswered as Oluchi became immersed in a lifestyle far removed from her past. Meanwhile, Uchenna was left to pick up the pieces. His shop, once a source of pride, was now at risk. The bank had come to collect a loan, and his father's house was on the line. The pressure mounted. He had given everything for Oluchi, yet she had moved on. But fate had one more twist in store. As Uchenna walked through the village one evening, his heart heavy with grief, he overheard a conversation that stopped him in his tracks. Ugochukwu was in town, preparing to meet Oluchi's family. He was ready to make her his. Uchenna's world went silent. Everything he had worked for, everything he had sacrificed, had led to this moment. His mind went blank, his knees weak beneath him. He stood in the middle of the street, unable to move. But what will happen next? Will Uchenna lose everything? Will Oluchi remember the love and sacrifice he gave her? Find out in the next chapter.